I'm Chloe, 34 years old, and 5 years ago, I thought I married the love of my life. Ethan was kind, brilliant, and for a while, I believed we were building something solid together. Until his mother, Serafina, decided our marriage was actually her domain. The unannounced visits, the subtle insults, the constant rearranging of my life, I tolerated it all. Until last week. At our anniversary party, Ethan stood up smiling and announced that Serafina was moving in with us, a decision they made entirely behind my back. But what they didn't know was, I had a surprise of my own, and trust me, no one saw it coming. Before I tell you exactly how I flipped the script that night, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to stand up to controlling in-laws? And hit like and subscribe, because sometimes, the only way to save your marriage is to walk away first. I had always been the kind of person who meticulously planned, not in a rigid, joyless way, but with a deep appreciation for intentional design. Whether it was a city park, a new building, or my own life, I excelled as an environmental architect, creating spaces that were not just functional, but truly harmonious with their surroundings, sustainable and beautiful. That attention to detail, that foresight, it extended to everything. I had a clear vision for my career, for my future, for the kind of life I wanted to build. Meeting Ethan wasn't explicitly in any of those detailed plans, but sometimes life throws you a curveball that turns out to be better than anything you could have imagined. We met at an urban sustainability conference 7 years ago. I was presenting a case study on a green infrastructure project my firm had designed for a downtown revitalization. He was there, not as a city planner or a developer, but as a high school science teacher, passionate about engaging his students in STEM and environmental issues through his robotics club. He approached me after my talk, not with a cheesy pickup line or a compliment about my dress, but with a genuinely insightful question about the long-term impact of permeable surfaces on local ecosystems. That alone made him stand out. Most people don't grasp the profound connection between urban design and the health of our communities. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, from the intricacies of biomimicry in architecture to the best local coffee shops with ethical sourcing. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers, and a week later, we were on our first date. Our relationship felt effortless, natural. Ethan was kind, incredibly thoughtful, and seemed to genuinely appreciate my ambition and independence as much as his own. He loved his work, guiding young minds, and I loved how animated he would get discussing a student's breakthrough in a robotics competition or a fascinating new discovery in astrophysics. We both worked hard, but we always made time for each other, for quiet evenings on the couch, for weekend hikes in the coastal redwoods, for dreaming about a future together. Within a year, we were talking about marriage. That's when I first met Serafina Hayes, Ethan's mother. Initially, she seemed charming, a retired librarian with impeccable manners and a surprisingly active social calendar. She welcomed me with a warm hug, a homemade vegan lasagna, a thoughtful gesture given my dietary preferences, and asked detailed, intelligent questions about my work and family background. But beneath that polished veneer, there was something else, a subtle, almost imperceptible possessiveness over Ethan that I noticed but in my blissful ignorance chose to dismiss. Ethan has always been my special boy, she'd say, multiple times that evening, each time reaching over to smooth his hair or adjust his collar like he was still 5 years old. He's taken such good care of me since his father passed. The warning signs, in hindsight, were there from the very beginning, appearing gradually like hairline cracks in a foundation. After our engagement, Serafina's behavior intensified. She started dropping by our downtown apartment unannounced, always with a plausible excuse. Just happened to be in the neighborhood, or baked too many blueberry scones, darling. Thought you two might enjoy them. She'd inspect our space with a critical eye, running a finger along a bookshelf to check for dust, or more often, rearranging our carefully organized kitchen cabinets. Ethan likes his coffee mugs arranged by size, she'd say, sliding them into an entirely new order. I've always done it this way for him. When I gently pointed out that Ethan had never expressed such a preference to me, she'd smile tightly, a condescending glint in her eyes. Well, dear, there are some things only a mother knows. After we married and bought our first home, a charming craftsman bungalow near the university, Serafina's intrusions escalated from subtle to overt. She had strong opinions about everything: Our furniture arrangement, too modern, Chloe, too cold. Our choice of drought-tolerant landscaping. Where are the roses, darling? A proper home has roses. And especially my cooking. Nothing was ever quite right. My carefully researched plant-based recipes were too exotic or not hearty enough for her growing boy. Ethan would give me apologetic glances, a silent, "I'm sorry" in his eyes, but he rarely intervened. "That's just how Mom is," he'd say after she left. "She means well." I tried to establish boundaries, gently at first, wanting to avoid conflict. I suggested we set specific days for family dinners rather than impromptu visits. I asked Ethan to give me advance notice when his mother was coming over, especially if I wasn't going to be home. He agreed to these seemingly reasonable requests, but then he'd often forget, or more accurately, be guilt-tripped by Serafina into changing plans. She sounded lonely, he'd explain, his voice tinged with a familiar helplessness. What was I supposed to do? Despite these growing challenges, we built a good life together. We both advanced in our careers. I took on more complex, sustainable urban development projects, and Ethan was nominated for a prestigious teaching award. We traveled when we could, exploring remote eco-lodges and sustainable communities, talking about starting a family someday. Our 5th anniversary was approaching, and I wanted to make it special, a reaffirmation of our foundation. I planned an intimate gathering at our home with our closest friends and family, catered by Ethan's favorite farm-to-table restaurant. I spent weeks coordinating every detail, wanting everything to be perfect. What Ethan didn't know was that I had been working on another, far more significant project simultaneously, one that I hoped would strengthen our marriage, but which I increasingly realized could also serve as my safety net if needed. The mounting tension with Serafina and Ethan's persistent reluctance to address it had planted seeds of deep concern. I loved my husband deeply, but I was beginning to question whether he could ever truly prioritize our marriage, our shared life, over his mother's incessant demands. The constant erosion of my autonomy, the subtle invalidation of my choices, it was taking its toll. The criticism extended beyond my professional life. Serafina had opinions on everything from how I loaded the dishwasher, "You're wasting water, darling, fill it to the brim," to the way I folded Ethan's shirts. "He prefers them folded this way," she'd say, refolding laundry I had just put away. "I've always done it like this." Family gatherings became exercises in restraint for me. At Thanksgiving dinner with Ethan's extended family, I shared news about a groundbreaking urban green space project my firm had recently completed, a major milestone in my career. "That's nice, dear," Serafina interrupted, patting my hand dismissively before turning to the table. "But the real excitement is that Ethan's robotics team won the regional competition this year. Tell everyone about that, honey." I watched my husband launch into a story about his team, his mother beaming beside him. My accomplishment was forgotten, deemed less important than his. It was a pattern that repeated at every family event. My voice minimized, my achievements diminished, my presence often reduced to an accessory to Ethan's life. Holidays were particularly difficult. During our second Christmas as a married couple, Serafina surprised us by arriving 3 days before Christmas Eve, suitcases in tow. "I thought I'd come early to help with the preparations," she announced, already hanging her elaborate beaded coat in our entryway. "I'll be staying until New Year's. I brought all my special recipes." We had planned a quiet Christmas, just the two of us, a tradition we had started, before visiting family on Christmas Day. Those plans evaporated as Serafina took over our kitchen, invited additional family members without consulting us, and rearranged our holiday decorations to be more festive. When I tried to discuss the issue with Ethan later, he dismissed my concerns. "It's Christmas, Chloe. Family is important this time of year. Mom just wants to make it special for us." "But we had plans of our own," I insisted, feeling a growing knot of frustration in my stomach. "I feel like our wishes don't matter." "You're overreacting," he replied, already retreating behind his usual defense. "It's not a big deal to adjust our plans a little." But it wasn't just a little. It was a constant adjustment, always in Serafina's favor, never in mine. Perhaps the most hurtful incident occurred during a family reunion last summer. Ethan's cousins were discussing their favorite family traditions, and I mentioned how much I enjoyed our new tradition of Sunday morning urban hikes, exploring the city's hidden greenways. "Oh, those won't last," Serafina interjected with a laugh, waving her hand dismissively. Ethan has never been the outdoorsy type. He gets that from his father. When he was little, we tried camping once and had to come home early because he was miserable. Actually, Mom, Ethan corrected her, a rare flicker of annoyance in his voice. I enjoy hiking with Chloe. It's become one of my favorite parts of the week. For a moment, I felt validated, seen, until Serafina added with a saccharine smile. Well, you've always been so accommodating, sweetheart. Remember how you took ballet lessons for a month because your elementary school crush was in the class? She turned to the group, her eyes twinkling with feigned innocence. He hated every minute but wouldn't admit it. Everyone laughed, and the implication was clear. Ethan was only hiking to please me, just as he'd only done ballet to please his childhood crush. My husband's genuine enjoyment of our time together was reduced to another example of his accommodating nature, his lack of true preference. Later that evening, I overheard a conversation that would become the true breaking point. I was bringing dessert plates to the kitchen when I heard Serafina's voice from the patio, hushed but clear. I'm worried about Ethan, she was saying to his Aunt Carol. Chloe is so focused on her career. She works such long hours, and their house, well, it shows it. I stop by to help tidy up when I can, but it's not the same as having someone dedicated to creating a proper home. Have they talked about children? Aunt Carol asked, her voice tinged with sympathy. She always says someday, Serafina replied, her voice heavy with disapproval. But you know what that means for career women. I've been thinking it might be best if I sold my house and moved in with them. Ethan wouldn't have to eat takeout all the time, and I could create the kind of home environment he deserves. My blood ran cold. Do you think Chloe would be on board with that? Aunt Carol asked skeptically. Oh, Ethan can convince her, Serafina said confidently, her tone chillingly assured. He knows I only want what's best for them. Besides, with me there to handle the household, maybe Chloe would finally feel free to focus on starting a family. I stood frozen in the kitchen, dessert plates clutched to my chest, as the full weight of my mother-in-law's machinations became clear. This wasn't about helping us, or even about downsizing her own home, which she had hinted at occasionally. This was about inserting herself permanently into our marriage, about creating the dynamic she wanted, with her as the primary woman in Ethan's life, and me relegated to the role she deemed appropriate, a busy, somewhat neglectful wife who needed her oversight to manage a proper home and produce grandchildren. What hurt most was the dawning realization that Ethan might actually agree with her. Despite his occasional weak attempts at support, he consistently chose the path of least resistance, accommodating his mother's intrusions rather than standing firm on the boundaries of our marriage. That night, lying awake beside my sleeping husband, I made a decision. I needed to create options for myself, a contingency plan that would allow me to protect my independence, my sanity, and my self-respect if necessary. I loved Ethan, but I couldn't continue to be erased in my own marriage. The next day, I began my secret project. The morning after overhearing Serafina's plans, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I needed space to think, to process what I'd learned, and to decide how to move forward. While Ethan left for school, I sat at our kitchen table with a legal pad and began to assess my situation with the same methodical approach I applied to my architectural projects. The facts were clear. I loved my husband, but our marriage had developed a structural weakness. Ethan's inability to establish boundaries with his mother had created a three-person relationship, where my needs and feelings were consistently devalued, minimized, or ignored. The question was whether this fundamental flaw could be repaired, or if I needed to prepare for the very real possibility that it couldn't. I decided to pursue both paths simultaneously, work to strengthen my marriage while creating a safety net for myself if those efforts failed. The next day, I scheduled an appointment with a marriage counselor, intending to ask Ethan to join me. But before I could even broach the subject, he announced that his mother had scheduled a family dinner for that exact time to discuss some exciting news. I attended the dinner only to discover that Serafina wanted to show us listings for large, older houses near hers that she was considering buying, with the clear implication that she might need help managing them, or that we should consider joining her in a multi-generational living arrangement. Ethan seemed enthusiastic, oblivious to the dread rising within me, while I felt increasingly invisible, trapped. That weekend, while Ethan was away at a regional robotics tournament with his team, I began researching properties in earnest. I wasn't looking for anything extravagant, nothing large or flashy, just a small self-contained place that could be entirely mine alone if needed, a sanctuary. After viewing several options, I found it. A modest, somewhat dilapidated old schoolhouse, about 40 minutes from downtown. Nestled on a sprawling, half-acre lot with mature oak and redwood trees, bordering a quiet creek. The house itself needed significant work, a total renovation, but the bones were good, and I could immediately envision its potential. Its remote location, its connection to nature, its inherent sense of history and quiet solitude, it called to me. Using money I'd saved meticulously from my year-end bonuses, funds I'd originally intended for a future family eco-vacation home, I made an offer. It was accepted the following week. I told no one, not even Maya, my closest friend. This wasn't about creating drama or threatening my marriage in a fit of pique. It was about reclaiming my sense of agency. Over the next several months, I developed a careful routine. I told Ethan I was working late on a major high-stakes project at my firm, which wasn't entirely untrue. I simply omitted that the project was personal rather than professional. 3 evenings a week, sometimes entire weekends when Ethan was busy with school or his robotics club, I would drive out to the old schoolhouse and work alongside the contractors I'd hired, designing and implementing renovations that slowly, painstakingly transformed the space. The process was incredibly therapeutic. Each decision I made, from the open concept living area with reclaimed wood beams, to the efficient minimalist kitchen, to the large, light-filled studio space I created for my design work, was entirely mine. No one questioned my choices. No one suggested alternatives that would better suit someone else's preferences or flow. As the schoolhouse took shape, so did my confidence, my sense of self. I also consulted with both a marriage counselor and a lawyer during this time. Not because I was planning to leave Ethan immediately, but because I needed to understand my options, legally and emotionally. The counselor suggested strategies for discussing boundaries with my husband, offering ways to articulate my needs without resorting to accusations. The lawyer advised me on protecting my assets, on ensuring my financial independence. Many women find themselves trapped in unhealthy situations because they didn't create an exit strategy. The lawyer, a kind but no-nonsense woman named Miss Davies, told me, "What you're doing isn't about giving up on your marriage. It's about ensuring you never have to choose between your self-respect and your security." Those words resonated deeply within me. I didn't want to leave Ethan. I wanted our marriage to thrive, to be a true partnership. But for that to happen, something fundamental needed to change in our dynamic. As our anniversary approached, I formalized the ownership of the schoolhouse, placing it solely in my name. My original plan had been to present it to Ethan as a surprise, a weekend retreat where we could reconnect, away from daily pressures and the suffocating influence of his mother, a place where we could rebuild our relationship on stronger, healthier foundations. I would suggest that we use the space for regular marriage maintenance time, dedicated to nurturing our connection and addressing issues before they became insurmountable problems. I even prepared a heartfelt letter explaining my hopes for our future, acknowledging the challenges we'd faced, and expressing my commitment to working through them together. The schoolhouse would be a symbol of new beginnings, of prioritizing our marriage above all external influences. But as I put the final touches on both the schoolhouse and my presentation, doubt crept in. Ethan had shown little genuine interest in addressing the underlying issues in our marriage. When I'd made tentative attempts to discuss his mother's increasing presence in our lives, he'd either brushed off my concerns as overthinking or accused me of being oversensitive. Would a grand gesture, no matter how thoughtful, truly change such entrenched patterns? Would he finally see the depth of the problem, or would he just see another nice thing I had done for us that he could then take for granted? Still, I held on to hope. Our 5th anniversary seemed like the perfect opportunity for a reset, a moment to remember why we'd chosen each other and recommit to that choice. I carefully placed the schoolhouse deed and keys in a decorative folder, along with the letter and a series of photos of the renovated space. It would be my anniversary gift to Ethan, and potentially to our marriage. The night before our anniversary party, I drove to the schoolhouse one last time. I walked through the rooms, appreciating how every space reflected my vision, my values. The open kitchen with its repurposed redwood countertops, the cozy reading nook with built-in bookshelves, the small office where I could work when needed, bathed in natural light. Every element represented a piece of myself, a conscious choice, a reclaiming. In the master bedroom, I stood before the full-length mirror and made a silent promise to my reflection. Whatever happened next, I would not lose myself again. I would not shrink to accommodate someone else's expectations or demands. I loved Ethan, but I also loved the woman staring back at me. The woman who had created this sanctuary, this tangible manifestation of her own worth. As I locked up the schoolhouse, the faint scent of fresh lumber and possibility still in the air, I felt a curious sense of peace. I didn't know whether the folder in my bag would represent a new chapter in my marriage, or the beginning of a different story altogether. But for the first time in months, the uncertainty didn't terrify me. I had created options for myself. Whatever came next, I would face it standing on solid ground of my own making. I drove home, arriving just as the first blush of dawn touched the horizon, to finish the final preparations for our anniversary party. The schoolhouse keys and deeds securely tucked away in my purse. The next day would bring clarity, one way or another. I was as ready as I could be. What I couldn't have prepared for, what no amount of planning or foresight could have anticipated, was Ethan's announcement. The public declaration of a life-altering decision made entirely without my input. The smug triumph on Serafina's face as she watched my reaction, her eyes gleaming with barely suppressed glee. In an instant, my carefully constructed plans, my hopes for a gentle, hopeful revelation, shifted. The folder in my purse no longer represented a potential weekend retreat for reconnection. It had become my declaration of independence. "You'll adjust, dear. You always do." Serafina's words, echoing past conversations, hung in the air between us, dripping with condescension, a silent challenge. The party continued around us, a cacophony of polite chatter, guests pretending not to notice the sudden heavy tension as they moved toward the dining room for cake. Ethan had already been pulled into a conversation with his uncle, laughing, completely oblivious to the emotional earthquake he had just unleashed, leaving me standing alone, frozen, with his mother. I took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the weight of my purse against my side, the folder inside suddenly seeming to burn through the leather, demanding to be revealed. This wasn't how I'd planned to present my surprise, but plans had clearly changed. This wasn't a time for delicate suggestions or private conversations. This was a direct assault on my partnership, my home, my very autonomy. "Actually, Serafina," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, "I think we need to finish this conversation with Ethan present." Without waiting for her response, without giving her a chance to deflect or dismiss me, I moved across the room to where my husband stood, his back to me. I gently touched his arm, interrupting his conversation with his uncle. "Ethan, we need to talk." His brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of irritation, but then he saw the set of my jaw, the determined glint in my eye. "All three of us," I clarified, nodding towards Serafina, who had followed me, her smug smile already faltering, replaced by a flicker of concern. Ethan looked at his mother, then back at me. "Sure, Chloe, we can step into the study for a minute." He began to turn, leading the way to our small private office. I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "No, this affects everyone here. You made your announcement publicly. I think it's appropriate that mine is public too." Confusion flashed across his face, a dawning comprehension that this wasn't a minor disagreement. But before he could question me further, before Serafina could interject with a dismissive remark, I turned to address our guests. I picked up a dessert fork from a passing tray and tapped it against my champagne glass until the room quieted, all eyes turning to me. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us tonight," I began, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs, but my voice clear, projecting confidently across the suddenly silent room. As Ethan mentioned, we apparently have a double celebration happening. His mother moving in with us is certainly unexpected news. To me. A murmur rippled through the room, a collective intake of breath. Ethan stepped closer, concern evident in his expression, his earlier obliviousness finally replaced by alarm. "Chloe, what are you doing?" he whispered, his hand reaching for my arm. I continued as if he hadn't spoken, my gaze sweeping across the faces of our friends and family, some confused, some openly curious, some clearly uncomfortable. "Since tonight seems to be the night for surprises, I'd like to share one of my own." I reached into my purse, my hand closing around the familiar texture of the leather folder, and pulled it out. The cream-colored paper felt substantial in my hands, a physical manifestation of the boundaries I was finally, irrevocably asserting. For the past 4 months, I explained, my voice gaining strength with each word, I've been working on a special project. I purchased and renovated a small property near Oakwood Hills. I removed the first photo from the folder and held it up, a charming exterior shot of the old schoolhouse, now completely transformed with its freshly painted sage green door, sun-drenched windows, and newly planted native garden. It's a beautiful space, I said, my voice tinged with the pride of creation, completely designed to my specifications. No compromises, no adjustments to accommodate anyone else's preferences, just mine. Ethan stared at the photo, his jaw slack, confusion evident on his face. I don't understand. You bought a house without telling me? His voice was a strained whisper. Yes, I replied simply, my gaze meeting his directly, holding it. Just as you arranged for your mother to move into our home without consulting me. His face flushed, a mottled red creeping up his neck. That's different. She's family, he sputtered, his voice rising in indignation. So am I, Ethan, I countered, my voice quiet but firm. Or at least I thought I was. Your partner, the woman you swore to share a life with. I turned back to our guests, who were now watching with a mixture of discomfort and open fascination. The party atmosphere entirely evaporated. In light of tonight's announcement, I'd like to make one of my own. My gaze swept between Ethan and Serafina, then settled on the latter, who looked like she'd just been slapped. Serafina is indeed welcome to move in with Ethan, and I'll be moving to my new place. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, almost deafening. Serafina's face had transformed from smug superiority to shocked disbelief, her perfectly coiffed hair seeming to deflate with her composure. Ethan looked as though I'd physically struck him, his expression a mixture of confusion, betrayal, and dawning horror. You can't be serious, he finally managed, his voice barely a raw whisper. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, I replied, my voice unwavering. I extracted the deed from the folder, a crisp, official document, and handed it to him, watching as his eyes scanned the legal text. The reality slowly, painfully, sinking in. This house is mine, not ours. Mine. I paid for it with my own savings, and it's titled solely in my name. I don't understand, he repeated, his eyes pleading. Why would you do this? If you were unhappy, why didn't you say something? The question was so absurd, so utterly disconnected from our reality, that a small, incredulous laugh escaped me. It wasn't a joyful sound, but one born of bitter irony. I have been saying something, Ethan, I said, the words cutting through the silence. For years, you just haven't been listening. Our guests, sensing the irreparable rift, began to drift toward the front door, murmuring awkward goodbyes, their champagne glasses still clutched in their hands. Within minutes, only close family remained. Ethan's brother Liam and his wife Clara, Ethan's sister Sarah, and of course Serafina, who had recovered enough from her initial shock to find her voice. Her eyes narrowed, gleaming with fury. This is ridiculous, Serafina declared, her voice sharp and brittle, reaching for the deed in Ethan's still trembling hands. You can't possibly expect us to take this seriously, Chloe. You're having a tantrum because you didn't get your way. I intercepted her hand before she could grab the document, my grip firm. That's exactly the problem, Serafina. You've never taken me seriously. Neither of you have. I looked pointedly at Ethan, who recoiled slightly under my gaze. Every boundary I've tried to establish has been dismissed as an overreaction or an inconvenience. Every attempt I've made to prioritize our marriage has been undermined by your constant interference, Ethan's inability to say no, and your shared belief that I would simply adjust. Liam cleared his throat uncomfortably, sensing the volatile atmosphere. Maybe we should give you two some privacy to discuss this. No need, I said calmly, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. The party's over anyway. Thank you all for coming. It was a clear dismissal, a subtle but undeniable command for them to leave. Sarah, surprisingly, gave me a quick, genuinely sympathetic hug before ushering her reluctant brother Ethan toward the door. Liam followed with Clara, leaving just the three of us, me, Ethan, and Serafina, standing in our decorated living room, anniversary balloons still bobbing cheerfully against the ceiling, mocking the shattered reality below. As the front door closed behind the last guests, Serafina's composure cracked completely. "How dare you humiliate my son like this?" she hissed, her face contorted with rage, her eyes blazing. "After everything he's done for you, this is how you repay his generosity, by embarrassing him in front of everyone we know?" "Mom, Chloe," Ethan started, stepping forward, his shoulders slumped. But I cut him off. "Generosity?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly, infused with years of pent-up frustration. "Is that what we're calling it? When someone makes unilateral decisions that affect both partners in a marriage? When they consistently prioritize their mother's wishes, her whims, her emotional manipulations, over their wife's feelings, her needs, her dignity? That's an interesting definition of generosity, Serafina." "You've always been selfish," she spat, her voice venomous, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Always putting your career first, neglecting your home, neglecting Ethan's needs. You're not a proper wife." "And what exactly are Ethan's needs, Serafina?" I asked, turning to my husband, my voice quiet but sharp, loaded with accusation. "Because from where I stand, the only needs being prioritized in this marriage are yours, Serafina. Your need for control, your need to be the center of Ethan's world, your need to dictate every aspect of our lives." Ethan looked between us, conflict evident on his face, a man caught between two immovable forces. "Chloe, you're overreacting. I should have discussed Mom moving in with you first, I admit that. But buying a separate house? That's extreme." "Is it?" I asked quietly, my gaze piercing his. "Let me ask you something, Ethan. When exactly did you and your mother begin these months of discussion about her moving in? Because just 3 months ago, over dinner, you explicitly told me it would never happen. You said she was too attached to her house and her friends, that you wouldn't want her living with us. That would be too much." He had the grace to look profoundly uncomfortable, his eyes darting away from mine. Things changed. Her house sold faster than expected. "And her house wasn't even on the market 3 months ago, Ethan," I interrupted, my voice rising with indignation at the sheer audacity of his lie. "You lied to me, Ethan. You knew how I would react. So you and your mother made plans behind my back, hatched this scheme. And then you ambushed me with the decision at our anniversary party, in front of everyone we know, as if I were merely a passive observer in my own life. If anyone's behavior is extreme here, Ethan, it's yours. It's hers." Serafina, seeing Ethan cornered, stepped between us, literally inserting herself into our conversation, her body a shield between her son and my accusations. "Ethan was just trying to spare your feelings, Chloe. He knows how difficult you can be about these things." "Stop speaking for my husband," I said firmly, my voice cutting through her interjection like a knife. "That's part of the problem, Serafina. You're constantly inserting yourself between us, dictating our conversations, our decisions, our very lives, and he lets you." "Don't talk to my mother that way," Ethan snapped, a flicker of his old automatic defense of her. "And there it is," I said softly, a weary resignation in my voice. "You'll defend her immediately. You'll snap at me, the woman you supposedly love. But where is that same defense when she undermines me? When she criticizes our home, my cooking, my career? When she shows up unannounced or rearranges our furniture without permission? You've never once, not once, taken my side in those conflicts, Ethan. Never once chosen your wife over your mother's need for control." The truth of my words seemed to register, because Ethan's anger deflated slightly, replaced by a painful awareness. He ran a hand through his hair, looking utterly defeated. "That's not fair, Chloe. Isn't it?" I picked up the photo of my schoolhouse, the renovated, sun-drenched interior. I looked at it for a long moment, drawing strength from the image of the sanctuary I had created. Then I returned my gaze to my husband, my voice clear and resolute. "I bought this place because I needed something that was just mine. Something that couldn't be invaded or altered or criticized. I needed a space where I felt valued and respected, because I haven't felt that way in our marriage for a very long time, Ethan. I haven't felt like your partner. I felt like an afterthought, a problem to be managed." "So this is an ultimatum?" he asked, his voice raw, laced with disbelief. "Either my mother doesn't move in, or you leave?" I shook my head. This isn't an ultimatum, Ethan. It's a boundary. A very clear, very necessary boundary. I'm no longer willing to be the third wheel in my own marriage. You have a choice to make, but so do I. And I choose not to live in an environment where I'm constantly dismissed, devalued, and disrespected. I gathered the deed and photos, returning them to my purse with a decisive click. Then, with a practiced motion, I picked up an overnight bag I'd packed that morning, another part of my contingency plan, tucked away in the back of my closet, and headed for the front door. "Where are you going?" Ethan asked, panic finally entering his voice, stripping away his anger and confusion. "To my schoolhouse," I replied simply, my hand already on the doorknob. "I think we all need some space to consider what happens next." As I opened the front door, letting the cool evening air flow into the suffocating room, I heard Serafina's voice behind me, shrill and desperate. "This is ridiculous, Ethan. She's bluffing. She'll be back tomorrow when she calms down." I didn't hear my husband's response. I closed the door behind me, walked to my car, and drove away from the home that had ceased to feel like mine long ago. The old schoolhouse, my sanctuary, welcomed me with quiet solitude. I dropped my overnight bag in the entryway and moved through the rooms, turning on lamps as I went. The soft lighting cast a warm, inviting glow over the spaces I had so carefully designed. For the first time that evening, perhaps for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe properly. I kicked off my heels and curled up on the window seat in the living room, gazing out at the moonlit garden, at the familiar silhouette of the towering redwoods against the night sky. My phone had been buzzing almost continuously since I left. Messages from Ethan, from Maya, from other friends who had witnessed the evening's drama. I wasn't ready to respond to any of them. Instead, I sat in the silence, allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. There was sadness, certainly, a profound grief for the marriage I had thought we had, for the future we had planned together. But beneath the sadness, beneath the exhaustion, was something unexpected, something liberating. Immense relief. After years of compromise that felt increasingly one-sided, of constantly adjusting and shrinking myself, I had finally, truly stood up for myself. Around midnight, headlights swept across the front window as a car pulled into the gravel driveway. I wasn't surprised when I heard Ethan's key in the lock. I had given him a copy, foolishly, in my original plan to present the schoolhouse as our shared retreat. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the transformed space with wide eyes before his gaze settled on me. "How did you find me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The address was on the deed," he replied, his voice hoarse. He hesitated, a tense moment of silence, before stepping fully inside. "Chloe, this place, it's beautiful." His eyes roamed over the exposed beams, the warm wood floors, the custom built-in bookshelves overflowing with books. "Thank you," I said simply. "You did all this yourself? The renovations?" he asked, still stunned. I nodded. "I worked with contractors, but the design is all mine." He moved slowly through the open-concept living area, taking in every detail, the farmhouse sink in the kitchen, the carefully curated plants, the way the light fell. "This must have taken months," he said finally, his voice laced with awe and disbelief. "For months," I confirmed. 3 evenings a week, plus weekends when you were coaching or at tournaments. Understanding, painful and belated, dawned on his face. The late nights at work, the weekend meetings I'd mentioned, they were all here. "Yes." He sank onto the sofa across from my window seat, looking suddenly exhausted, emotionally drained. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Would you have listened, Ethan?" I asked gently. My voice devoid of accusation, just weary honesty. "Or would you have dismissed it as an overreaction? Just like you've dismissed every other concern I've raised about our marriage. Every time I tried to set a boundary, it was deemed an inconvenience. Every time I said I was unhappy, I was accused of being oversensitive. Our marriage was fine," he protested, but there was uncertainty, a tremor of doubt in his voice. "Was it really?" I countered. "Because from where I stand, our marriage has been slowly eroding for years. Every time your mother crossed a boundary and you defended her instead of us, another piece crumbled away. Every time she undermined my career or criticized my home or dismissed my contributions, and you said nothing, another crack appeared. You're exaggerating. Mom can be difficult sometimes, but..." "She rearranged our furniture when we weren't home, Ethan. She criticized my cooking, my housekeeping, my career choices. She showed up unannounced and expected to be accommodated no matter what plans we had. She called my architectural projects nice little hobbies. She told my aunt I was neglecting you, that our house wasn't a proper home because I worked. She implied I was selfish for not focusing on children. And you never, not once, stood up to her. You never, not once, put me first. She's my mother, he said. As if that explained and excused everything. As if maternal status trumped spousal respect. And I'm your wife, I countered, my voice firm. Or at least I thought I was. Your partner. But partners make decisions together. They don't ambush each other with life-changing announcements at parties. He had the grace to look ashamed. His head bowed, unable to meet my gaze. I should have talked to you about Mom moving in. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. But you're not sorry about the decision itself, I noted. Just the way you announced it. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. A gesture of deep frustration. I don't know what you want me to say, Chloe. She's my mother. She needs a place to live. She has a place to live, I pointed out, my voice unwavering. She chose to sell it, Ethan. She chose to sell it without consulting us, without consulting me, because she wanted to insert herself permanently into our marriage. And you enabled that choice. That's not fair. She's getting older. The house was too much for her to maintain. There are other options, Ethan, between too much house and moving in with us, I pointed out, my voice steady. Downsizing to a condo, a retirement community, an apartment near us, but not with us. Options we could have discussed together as partners, if either of you had bothered to include me in the conversation. Silence fell between us as Ethan absorbed my words. Outside, an owl hooted softly in the stillness. Where's your mother now? I asked finally. At our house, he replied, his voice flat. She insisted on staying to help clean up after the party. She told me she wanted to wait there for me. I nodded, unsurprised. And what did she say when you left to come here? His expression told me everything I needed to know. She thinks I'm being ridiculous, I guessed. Throwing a tantrum. She probably told you not to chase after me, that I'd come crawling back once I calmed down. Something like that, he admitted, his voice barely audible. And yet here you are, I said, a faint, weary smile touching my lips. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze finally meeting mine, truly meeting mine. Because despite what you seem to think, Chloe, I do care about our marriage. I love you, Sam. I know you do, Ethan, I said softly. But love isn't enough if there's no respect. And you haven't respected me as your partner for a long time. That's not true, he protested, his voice laced with desperation. Isn't it? I challenged calmly but firmly. You made a major life decision without consulting me. You lied to me about your intentions, about your discussions with your mother. You allowed your mother to criticize and undermine me repeatedly without ever standing up for me, without ever choosing me. How is any of that respectful, Ethan? How is that the behavior of a partner who values me, who sees me as an equal? He was silent, unable to counter my points, his gaze falling to his hands. I love you too, Ethan, I continued, my voice gentle but resolute. But I can't continue in a marriage where I'm constantly the one expected to bend, to adjust, to accommodate. I need a partner who puts our relationship first, not his mother, not her demands, us. So what are you saying? This is it? 5 years of marriage and you're just walking away. His voice was filled with a familiar fear. I shook my head. I'm not walking away, Ethan. I'm standing firm. There's a difference. I moved from the window seat to sit beside him on the sofa, close but not touching. I want our marriage to work, I said honestly, looking into his troubled eyes. But for that to happen, things need to change. Real, substantive changes. Not just temporary adjustments until we fall back into old patterns. I need proof, Ethan. I need to see you fight for our marriage, not just for peace in your family dynamic. What kind of changes? He asked wearily, cautiously. First, I said, holding up a finger, marriage counseling, non-negotiable. We need a neutral third party to help us establish healthy boundaries and communication patterns. We clearly can't do it alone. He nodded reluctantly, his shoulders slumping in resignation. Okay, counseling. What else? Second, I continued, holding up another finger. Your mother cannot move in with us. Not now, not ever. It would be disastrous for our marriage. I cannot and will not live in a home that is also hers. His expression hardened, the last vestiges of his old resistance flaring. "She's already sold her house, Chloe. Where is she supposed to go?" "As I said before, there are other options, Ethan," I pointed out, my voice unwavering. "We can help her find a place nearby if that's what she wants. A condo, a senior living community with independent apartments, an apartment. But our home needs to be our sanctuary, Ethan, not a battleground. Not a place where I feel constantly judged and undermined." "She's going to be hurt," he said, his voice tinged with disappointment and dread. "Yes," I acknowledged, "she will be. And you'll need to be the one to set that boundary with her, Ethan, not me. That's the third change. I'm done being the bad guy, the obstacle between you and your mother. If we're going to rebuild our marriage, if we're going to have a future, you need to start prioritizing us. You need to defend our partnership. You need to finally, unequivocally, choose your wife." Ethan was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands, his head bowed. I could see the conflict warring within him, the lifetime of conditioning to put his mother's feelings first, to avoid her disapproval at all costs, warring with the raw, undeniable recognition that our marriage, his deepest bond, was genuinely at risk. He looked like he was aging before my eyes, the weight of his choices crashing down on him. "I don't know if I can do that," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper filled with a heartbreaking honesty. His honesty hurt, a sharp pang in my chest, but I appreciated it. It was the first truly honest thing he'd said all night, perhaps in years. "I know," I said softly. "That's why I bought this place. I needed to create options for myself, in case you couldn't or wouldn't choose our marriage." "So what happens now?" he asked, finally looking up, his eyes bleak. "Now we take some time," I replied. "I'm going to stay here for a while, and you should go home, talk to your mother, think about what you want, and what you're willing to do to save our marriage. If you decide you want to try, my first two conditions stand: counseling and your mother finding her own place. If those aren't acceptable to you, then we need to have a different conversation entirely. A conversation about separation, about divorce." "And if I agree?" he asked, a flicker of hope, desperate and fragile, in his eyes. "Will you come home?" I shook my head. "Not right away. I think we need the separation right now. Time to reset and reflect. Time for you to truly understand what you lost and what you need to fight for. But I would commit to the process, to working through our issues with professional help, to dating you again, Ethan, to rebuilding trust, brick by painstaking brick." He nodded slowly, processing everything I'd said. Then he stood, clearly preparing to leave. "For what it's worth," he said, pausing at the door, his hand on the frame, "I am sorry about tonight, the announcement. I knew you wouldn't be happy about Mom moving in, but I thought once it was settled, you'd just adjust. I didn't consider how disrespectful that was to you, to us." "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said, a small, genuine warmth spreading through me. "It's a start, Ethan, a genuine start." After he left, I locked the door and returned to my window seat. The confrontation had been draining, exhausting, but utterly necessary. For the first time in years, I'd expressed my needs clearly, set firm, non-negotiable boundaries, and stated my conditions. Whether Ethan could respect those boundaries, whether he could truly change, remained to be seen. But I had taken the first, terrifying step toward reclaiming my voice, my autonomy, in our relationship. As I prepared for bed in my new space, the renovated schoolhouse now truly feeling like my home, I felt a curious, profound sense of peace. Whatever happened next, I knew I would be okay. I had created this sanctuary for myself, this tangible proof that I could stand on my own if needed. It wasn't the outcome I had hoped for when I purchased the property, not the idyllic retreat for our shared future, but it had become something equally valuable, a foundation for my own strength and independence. I fell asleep that night not knowing whether my marriage would survive, but certain that I would, either way. 3 months passed like a slow turning page, each day a quiet testament to my resolve. I settled into life at the schoolhouse, finding profound comfort in the quiet routine I established. Mornings began with coffee on the back porch, watching the sun filter through the ancient oak trees, listening to the creek murmur nearby. Evenings ended with books in the window seat, or architectural plans spread across my small home office desk, bathed in the soft glow of my custom-designed lighting. The solitude, once unimaginable, became a kind of healing balm, allowing me to reconnect with myself, to listen to my own thoughts without interruption or external noise. I threw myself into work during those months, pouring my renewed energy and focus into my environmental architecture projects. I earned praise for a sustainable housing development that incorporated many of the passive design elements and reclaimed materials I tested in my own schoolhouse. My boss, a shrewd but supportive woman, noticed the renewed vigor I brought to the firm. "Whatever's changed in your personal life, Chloe," she commented during a project review, "it seems to be fueling your creativity. This is some of your best work yet." The irony wasn't lost on me. By stepping away from a situation that had diminished me, I had reclaimed parts of myself that had been slowly eroding: my confidence, my creative vision, my voice. Ethan and I maintained careful contact during our separation. Weekly coffee meetings in neutral locations, typically a small independent coffee shop halfway between our respective homes. In the beginning, these meetings were strained, filled with awkward silences and careful politeness, orbiting around practical matters rather than emotional ones. But as weeks passed, something shifted. After my ultimatum that night at the schoolhouse, Ethan had returned home to find Serafina rearranging our bedroom furniture to make space for her antique vanity, which she'd had delivered the very next day. According to him, seeing her moving our personal items, dictating our private space, something she'd done countless times before, suddenly looked different through the lens of our confrontation. I asked her to stop, he told me during our third coffee meeting, his voice still filled with disbelief at his own actions. She acted like I was being ridiculous, said she was just trying to help, and I was being unreasonable. "But for the first time, Chloe, I could see what you'd been talking about all these years." It finally clicked. That small recognition, that shift in his perspective, represented a significant breakthrough, a glimmer of hope that his eyes were finally opening. It led to Ethan's reluctant but genuine agreement to try marriage counseling. We began sessions with Dr. Morales, a seasoned therapist specializing in family boundaries and relational dynamics. In our very first session, Ethan admitted, his voice laced with shame, "I've always taken the path of least resistance with my mother. It was easier to let Chloe adjust, to let her bear the brunt, than to challenge Mom's behavior, to face her disapproval." Dr. Morales, a calm but piercing woman, looked at him, then at me. "And how has that strategy worked for your marriage, Ethan?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Ethan looked at me then, truly looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years, truly seeing my pain, my resilience. "It hasn't," he acknowledged, his voice breaking. "It's been catastrophic. I've been avoiding short-term discomfort at the cost of long-term, irreversible damage to the woman I love." Those counseling sessions became a sacred space, the only place where we could safely unpack years of accumulated resentments and misunderstandings. We learned to recognize destructive patterns, to communicate needs without accusation, to listen without defensiveness, to truly hear each other for the first time. The progress wasn't linear, there were setbacks, but it was progress nonetheless. Progress with Serafina came more slowly, and with far more drama. Her initial reaction to our separation was predictably histrionic. Accusations, tearful phone calls, mysterious health complaints that miraculously intensified whenever Ethan mentioned boundaries or independent living. She refused to consider alternative living arrangements, insisting that moving in with us had been the plan all along, and that I was destroying her son's happiness. "She's using the same tactics that have always worked before," I pointed out during a counseling session. "Emotional manipulation to get what she wants, to control." "I see that now," Ethan admitted, his jaw tight. "But what am I supposed to do? She's already sold her house, Chloe. She's homeless, by her own account." Dr. Morales helped Ethan craft a compassionate but firm response. He would help his mother find suitable housing. He would support her financially within reason. But she would not be moving in with us, period. Our home was for us. Serafina's resistance was formidable. She cycled through guilt, anger, martyrdom, and even attempts to recruit other family members to her cause, calling Liam and Sarah, complaining about my unreasonable demands, and Ethan's betrayal. Ethan wavered at times, the lifetime habit of accommodating his mother incredibly difficult to break. But then she showed up at our house unannounced one Sunday morning with a moving truck and several boxes. claiming she'd misunderstood the timeline and thought she was moving in today. That was the watershed moment. Seeing the truck, seeing her expectant, triumphant face, Ethan finally truly stood firm. "This isn't happening, Mom," he told her, his voice clear and steady, devoid of the usual wavering. "I found 3 excellent options for senior living communities near us. Independent apartments, Mom, with social activities, a garden club, everything you love. You're welcome to visit them anytime. But you cannot live here. This is Chloe's home, and my home, our home. After everything I've sacrificed for you," she cried, collapsing dramatically against a moving box, her voice laced with outrage and self-pity. "This is how you repay me? By choosing her over your own mother?" "I'm not choosing Chloe over you, Mom," he replied, his voice still steady despite her tears. "I'm choosing my marriage. There's a difference." It was a watershed moment, not just for Ethan and Serafina, but for our marriage. He finally, unequivocally, chose us. That evening, he called me at the schoolhouse, his voice filled with a quiet pride. "I don't think I've ever said no to her like that before," he admitted. "It was terrifying, Chloe, and then liberating." 2 weeks later, after much more drama and countless "I'm sacrificing everything for you" remarks, Serafina reluctantly agreed to tour the senior communities Ethan had researched. She eventually selected one that offered independent living apartments, with optional social activities and a thriving book club, though not without pointing out repeatedly what a monumental sacrifice she was making for Ethan's happiness. By the 3rd month of our separation, tangible, undeniable changes had taken root. Ethan and I were communicating more honestly than we had in years, rebuilding trust in small, consistent ways. Serafina had moved into her new apartment, still manipulative, yes, but with far less direct access to our daily lives, and with Ethan now armed with the tools to manage her attempts. The schoolhouse had served its purpose, not just as a sanctuary during the storm, but as a crucible where I had reforged my own strength. I found myself increasingly ready to consider next steps. On the day of Serafina's official move to the senior community, Ethan came to the schoolhouse. I invited him in for the first time since our confrontation 3 months earlier, the first time he'd been here for anything other than that raw, late-night discussion. "It's done," he said, accepting the steaming cup of coffee I offered him. "Mom's settled in her new place. She's already joined the community garden club and met a neighbor who plays bridge, surprisingly." "How does it feel?" I asked, watching him closely. He considered the question carefully, staring into his coffee cup. Complicated, guilty, a little, relieved immensely, proud of myself for the first time in a long time, sad for her that it came to this. All at once, but mostly, Chloe, I feel like I can breathe again. Like I've finally started acting like an adult in my relationship with her. Like I've finally chosen to grow up. We sat in companionable silence for a long moment, sipping our coffee, the afternoon sun casting long, peaceful shadows across the living room floor. "I've been thinking, Chloe," Ethan said finally, his voice soft, hesitant, "about our future." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "These past 3 months have been the hardest of my life," he admitted, his gaze meeting mine, earnest and vulnerable, but also the most clarifying. "I've realized how much I took you for granted, how I expected you to constantly accommodate everyone else's needs, especially Mom's, while ignoring your own, how I let her invalidate you. I don't want to be that husband anymore, Chloe. I want to be your partner, truly." "I've done a lot of thinking too," I said, my voice equally soft. "About what I need from our marriage, about what I'm willing to give, and about whether we can truly rebuild what's been broken beyond repair." "And what have you concluded?" he asked, vulnerability evident in his expression, his breath seeming to catch. "That I miss you, Ethan," I said simply. "Not the dynamic we had before. That wasn't healthy for either of us, and I won't go back to it. But I miss my partner, the man I fell in love with, the one who understood me, valued me, shared my dreams. I think he's finding his way back." Ethan reached across the butcher block coffee table and took my hand, his grip warm and steady. "I'd like to come home, Chloe," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. "If you're ready, if you think we can." I squeezed his hand, returning the pressure, but didn't immediately agree to a full return. "I think we need to be careful about next steps, Ethan. We've made incredible progress in counseling, and you've truly stepped up. But these patterns were years in the making. They won't be resolved in 3 months, or even a year. What do you suggest? He asked, ready to listen. A gradual transition, I replied. We continue counseling, of course. You stay over here sometimes. I stay at the house sometimes. We date each other again, Ethan. We rebuild trust. We relearn how to be a team. How to prioritize us before we fully reunite. He nodded, understanding the wisdom in taking things slowly, building a new, stronger foundation. And the schoolhouse? He asked, his gaze sweeping around the beautiful, light-filled rooms. I looked around at the space I'd created, the sanctuary that had sheltered me during one of the most difficult periods of my life, the place that had literally saved me. I'm keeping it, I said firmly, meeting his gaze. Not as an escape hatch, not as a threat, but as a reminder of my independence, of what I'm capable of. Maybe someday it becomes a rental property or a weekend retreat for both of us, but for now, it remains mine. My sanctuary, my personal accomplishment. To his credit, Ethan didn't argue. He looked around again, a new kind of appreciation in his eyes. That seems fair, Chloe. You've created something beautiful here, something that's entirely yours, something that represents your strength. I wouldn't want you to give that up. We spent that afternoon talking, really talking for hours, about our hopes for the future, the painful lessons we'd learned during our separation, the clear boundaries we needed to maintain going forward, not just with Serafina, but with our work, with our time, with our own needs. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, not a Hollywood ending where all problems vanish, but it felt like the beginning of something authentic, something mutual, something built on true partnership and respect. 2 weeks later, we celebrated our anniversary again. Not the grand party of 3 months ago filled with hidden tension and public declarations, but a quiet dinner for two at our favorite farm-to-table restaurant. No audience, no performances, no surprises, except the pleasant kind. To new beginnings, Ethan toasted, raising his glass to mine, his eyes full of tenderness and regret, but also hope. And hard-earned wisdom, I added, clinking my glass against his, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. The following weekend, we met at the schoolhouse, our mutual neutral ground, to discuss renovation plans for our main house. Ethan had suggested creating a dedicated office space for me there, a professional sanctuary within our shared home, acknowledging my need for my own space, my own focus, separate from the domestic sphere. As we sat at the small dining table, reviewing floor plans, I realized how far we'd come. 3 months ago, I couldn't imagine a future where Ethan would genuinely respect my boundaries, where he would actively participate in protecting our space and our relationship. Now we were collaboratively designing spaces that honored both our needs, both our professional lives, and our shared life together. What do you think about converting the guest room? He asked, sketching a potential layout for my new office. It has the best natural light, and we rarely have overnight guests anyway. What about your mother? I asked. The question almost a test, a gentle probe. Ethan didn't hesitate, didn't even flinch. Mom has her own place now, he replied, his voice clear, firm, and without a hint of conflict. If she visits, she can stay in a hotel, like any other out-of-town guest. Our home is for us, Chloe, exclusively. I smiled, a real, full, genuine smile, hearing the clarity in his voice, feeling the quiet strength of his conviction. We still had work to do, of course, boundaries to reinforce, old patterns to rewire, therapy sessions to attend. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope that things might someday miraculously change, but the grounded, solid hope that comes from witnessing change already in progress, from building it with your own hands, side by side. Our marriage had been broken, shattered by years of neglect and external intrusion. But then, deliberately, painstakingly, it was being rebuilt on a stronger, clearer foundation. The cracks would always be visible if you looked closely enough, reminders of what we'd almost lost, of the pain we'd endured. But the structure itself was sounder than before, fortified by honesty, respect, and mutual effort. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, those don't exist in real life. But it was something better, an authentic relationship between two imperfect people, committed to growing together rather than apart, committed to choosing each other every single day. Have you ever had to set difficult, uncomfortable boundaries in your relationships? What gave you the courage to finally stand up for yourself, to reclaim your voice. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Sharing these stories helps us all remember that we're not alone in our struggles. Thank you for listening to mine. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do in a relationship is simply to say, "This isn't working for me anymore, and I'm going to do something about it."